Hi, this is Dean with MaxiLift. Recently had a customer call and ask questions about installing buckets on a belt. Buckets such as the Tiger Tough bucket here, or this HD Max bucket that I have here. And the question had to do with using elevator bolts in just large flange whiz nuts like you see in this one here, or a fanged elevator bolt using a large flange whiz nut. Now the traditional method for using a number 1 Norway would be to use the number 1 Norway, a fender washer, lock washer, and then just a hex nut. And of course, the traditional way of using a fanged elevator bolt would be with a fender washer and a nylon lock nut. Now, of course, the reason that people try to use these other methods is because you eliminate a number of other pieces. You eliminate both washers in both applications, and you have fewer pieces to work with. So let's talk about this just a little bit. First of all, the different types of belting. Now, oftentimes we've got rubber belting. This is a 3-ply 330 rubber belt, and that's a very common belt used in bucket elevators today. We also have a PVC belt here. This is a 350 PIW PVC belt. So they're similar in strength as far as what they can handle in a bucket elevator. The rubber belt, though, is more pliable and the covers are softer. The PVC belt is tougher on the covers and doesn't remain as soft, especially in cold weather. So generally, PVC belt is not something you want to use in cold weather, and is also wouldn't want to use it with fanged elevator bolts because the bolts have a hard time going into that cover, especially in cold. But what about in warmer climates? Well, first of all, let's take a look at the rubber belt here with both of the traditional installations of the bolts. So we have a number 1 Norway and we have a fanged elevator bolt. Here with the number 1 Norway, you've got the washer, the lock washer, the hex nut. With the fanged elevator bolt, you've got the washer and the nylon lock nut. Both of them seat in there very nicely, and you can see that they both have pulled into the belt pretty well there. But let's look at this situation if you were to use just the large flange whiz nut. And I've got an application here that I've got just as a test. That is, here's a PVC belt. I've used a piece of plastic here to simulate the bucket. And what we have here is the fanged elevator bolt with the large flange whiz nut. We've got the traditional number 1 Norway with the washer, lock washer, and hex nut. And we have the fanged elevator bolt with the traditional nylon lock nut. Now, like I said, the PVC belt is tougher and stiffer. So I was just using a standard wrench to tighten these up, got them in there kind of snug. And you'll see from the back that the number 1 Norway has pulled in very nicely. The other two are going to be a lot tougher to get in. You can see as I turn it over here that both of them are sticking out just a little bit. And what would happen there is you're going to need a lot more torque to get those to pull down tight into the belt. So the situation that the customer was having is that they had installed this type here with the fanged elevator bolt and the large flange whiz nut, and they'd found that after a while those nuts had started to come loose, and they hadn't had that problem before. And I said, well, I think the problem is the combination of the PVC belt, the fanged elevator bolt, and just the large flange whiz nut, because you can see in this application over here, you'd be able to pull this pretty tight with a nylon lock nut. And of course, both of them would go in tighter if you wanted them to, if you really wanted to pull it in there. But with this one here, if you didn't quite get it tight enough, this nut is never going to come off anyway. This one here, if that starts to come in after thousands of times around the head pulley and boot pulley, it's going to loosen up to the point that this nut is no longer touching the plastic, and it's going to start to come off, which can cause a breakage of the bolt, can cause damage to the buckets, and other problems too. Now, if this one doesn't get tightened up, it can also cause some of those same problems, but you'll never have the nut start to come off. It's always going to stay in that position. So I just wanted to point out a few things about that if you're using a PVC belt, it's difficult to use fanged elevator bolts because they do have a hard time getting into the belt. But if you're only going to use a large flange whiz nut, like we've seen in some applications, there's a really good chance that this might start to come off and cause damage. If you have questions about elevator bolts or anything to do with bucket elevators, please contact MaxiLift. This is Dean with MaxiLift.